I'll just do a brief biog for John because it's a very illustrious body of work that he's got. Well, I'd say so. So John's work as a director, writer and producer is highly diverse. He's won a lot of praise across the board from critics and his peers. His films include Blind Flight, which is the story of the Middle East hostages, Brian Keenan and John McCarthy. Looks That Kill, a film about the consequences of dysmorphia. Living on the Edge, about the dark side of Thatcher's Britain, and Stormy Weather, about the life and work of Derek Jarman. He seeks to work the subjects in the gap between popular and art house, such as the global debt crisis and obviously the grassroots stuff you've seen about the NHS there. So that's John's bit of biog and background, and Steve Carne also, who I've got less to say about, except he was on the movie. So, do you want to come up and join us, Steve? Sure. Take your place, and thank you. I've got questions that I could ask, but I'm more interested in any from the audience. So I'll give you 30 seconds or so to ponder something before I jump in.
I'll ask a question. How aware do you think the British public are about the true state of the NHS? That this...
Totally unaware.
Absolutely.
Totally.
I mean, that's my
The
sense of it.
The ignorance is appalling. I mean, even I'm still pretty ignorant myself.
Yeah, I think even campaigning, we're always running to catch up.
Yeah.
And even when you get your head round one thing, buggers have done something else. Over here, and I was just saying to Leah here, they are very clever now. The powers that be, the corporations, particularly the powers that are running behind NHS England. You get your head around the vanguards, then they throw devolution in, which you're about to go through here.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you've then got, oh Christ, we've got to deal with devolution. You're busy dealing with that, then they throw in right to care over in Yorkshire, care closer to home down in Devon. It just gets, it's crazy.
Sorry,
right
Steve,
now.
could you say, you said right to care in your, is it
Yeah,
being piloted in
there's
Yorkshire?
I mean, do you know about I'm not an expert, I always say that now. I'm learning. There are people, Deborah's one. There's a woman called Jenny who's a fairly new to 909. She's brilliant too.
Deborah Reynolds. No, that's Lucy Reynolds. Sorry.
That's Lucy. No, there's Deborah and Jenny who wasn't in the film.
Okay.
She's in Yorkshire dealing with a vanguard that's about to happen there. The vanguard is part of Simon Stevens' 5-year forward view. And basically what they're doing is taking the what was once a good structure, never perfect, but then no one ever says it was. But the district general hospital structure has been completely broken up. Now they're squeezing everybody into these acute hospital centres, these new, big, magnificent PFI funded hospitals. For instance, in Manchester, you're going down to, I think, 5.
Yeah,
It's
in Greater
Healthier
Manchester.
Together in Manchester. It's called Healthier Together.
Healthier Together. They've got something similar in London. I think it's also called Health. What's the one in London called? Health for something together. It's the same thing.
That's across Greater
Healthy
Manchester,
together.
which is the region or sub-region to which this Devo scam
Yeah,
will
exactly.
happen,
So the Vanguard thing is what's kicking off. Northumberland is just the first one, which has been quietly completed. Northumbria rather, it goes from Carlisle to Berwick all the way down to Newcastle. It's a huge area.
Yeah.
And they've now got how many A&Es?
Go on. Oh, 1. So what's the furthest distance to get to?
That I have to check on.
Right.
It's a long way.
Yeah,
it's
okay,
a long way.
right.
What they're doing is downgrading the hospitals. You've still got what used to be accident and emergency, but now they're called
Urgent care centres.
That's the one, and
Thanks,
there's another
Margaret.
one as well.
Thank you.
Maintenance something
You're
or
on the
other.
next
There's a
film.
whole bunch of them, but they're just
And then it's got a
specifically.
different name when it's downgraded even more.
Exactly.
Without any doctors.
Yeah, exactly.
Doctors is all lefty nonsense, though, isn't it, having doctors?
So, what was the question again?
The question was about the general level of ignorance in the public.
Yeah, and I think it's really dangerous. I think the word ignorance is a little bit unfortunate.
Sure.
I get very cross with the public. I can't help it. I sit at home going at the TV, at my computer, and then I remember that actually until you've seen it, you can't see it because it's hidden behind that blue square.
Yeah.
We all look at it and we go NHS, and unless you peel it back and discover United Health, Optum, Serco, all those Virgins, you don't think about it because you're not paying for it. You just turn up, and part of our campaign, we desperately want people to start recognising. So we're thinking about stickers. We're thinking about things we can shove in windows. This ward is now a Virgin ward. This clinic is now, and make it a sticker that you could just put it quietly, walk away, and let them clean it.
Let them peel it off, and their workers will have to be conscious.
So we're
of
talking
it.
about that. I mean, that people don't know, and it's not their fault. There is an element of the public that go, well, I don't care really. John and I were just talking about free at the point of delivery, that phrase, and that's one we think we should stay away from, because some of the public, well, as long as they're not paying for it, I don't care. They haven't thought through the big processes. So that's
I was just telling John before, I've just had an experience. Over December, I took 3 different members of my family to A&E for different reasons. None of them were life-threatening, but they were all difficult, and I won't go into the detail. But basically, the third one was my husband, who ended up being taken into hospital for 3 nights. That was still with a Trafford General Hospital, which was incidentally the first NHS hospital ever. Okay, the first, and that has already been downgraded to an urgent care centre. Okay, but at least there were doctors there, and we were told by an auxiliary nurse when my husband was in that it was going to be downgraded again. So I then got really angry, and decided I would write a letter. So I wrote an open letter. This is personal. I am one of the major people in Trafford Green Party, so people know me for that. But I did it as just a personal thing, because I needed to do it straight away. You couldn't go through the processes, do you know what I mean, of the Green Party. And I wrote to the Central Manchester NHS Trust, the chief exec. And the letter was to him. I sent a proper letter, and then I copied it, emailed it to every press I could think about, every MP I could think about, you know what I mean, anybody that I could think about, I sent it to. And the Evening News, for the first time ever, showed an interest in it, and there was an article one evening on this. I wasn't featured high, I was just quoted in it, but apparently, just to say to you about people not knowing, Trafford Council, a couple of nights after that, had a council meeting, and although they were discussing other very important things, apparently there was a great buzz because some of our Green Party members were there, and they said, Margaret, your letter caused a stir, because they were actually, a lot of the councillors, these are local councillors, did not know that this was going to happen, right? It's already been decided. It's already been decided. They didn't know that it was going to happen at all. I demonstrated with junior doctors outside Trafford General on the first day of their strike, and they didn't know either. They work at Trafford General.
Can I just ask, I'll ask John to respond to that and ask if that's typical, but before I do, anyone in the audience who actually is now or ever has been an NHS worker, just thank you. If you want to say something in a little while about your experiences on the front line, I'll invite you to do that, and if you don't. Okay. John?
Well, I didn't know anything. Honestly, when I started the film completely sort of blind, really. I'd by default become organiser of our little West London 38 Degrees group. And I just thought, and that I'd been on, I went when 999 arrived, the march arrived in London. I just went on my own, and I found it very moving. And then I saw that David Owen, the leopard, had changed his spots. So I thought it was rather remarkable that this man who was a Blair before Blair. I mean, he was talking about Labour Party having to cozy up to the markets years before Blair. And suddenly he was coming out violently against the marketisation of the NHS. So I went to see him, basically. One thing, essentially, I was put in contact with Joanna Adams, and she checked me out and my colleague out with Ken Loach. And I literally tipped up a few days later all the early stuff with Joanna in her living room. I met her and filmed her when she drives away from work. I literally just met her. I shook hands, we started filming. I said, look, could I do something with you back at home? The stuff with her husband, that very revealing stuff with her husband, all of that happened that night. And the next day we were off to Stafford for that conference. So I went straight in the deep end, completely on a hunch that something's happening, but we don't know what it is. What interested me, and then very quickly what really interested me, and I had it in my one-page original thing, is what happens to genuine, ordinary grassroots movements when they meet the big political machine. You know, I didn't really realise what I was walking into. I mean,
So is this the first time you've done a film that sort of deals with that? Have you come across that phenomena in the past with your work, or is this?
Oh yeah, when I worked, of course, on the. Not sort of grassroots originated in this way. I mean, I think it's different what's happening now. I think it's for years I haven't been able to understand why people aren't smashing everything up.
Yeah.
Just in the middle of the 80s, I couldn't understand why people were just accepting it. And I wrote a screenplay 3 years ago, which I'm trying to get on the road now, which is it's a financial apocalypse story set in the near future, and it's pretty frightening. It deals with sort of thriller about economics, which isn't exactly normal, but this involves people on the streets saying, dump the debt, ditch the rich, and they're calling for, and still nobody's talking about it, and it has to happen eventually, which is a wipeout of a large part of sovereign debt. I mean, actually, that's the only way to solve the problem. I mean,
there's a growing movement now in the US for the students just to say, sack it, we're not paying our student debts, or former students.
That's right. Well, I've studied it quite a lot. I mean, for over 20 years, I realised 25 years ago that essentially the banking system was insolvent.
Yeah.
It's just a question of when it went bust. So that I already got an interest in the idea of grassroots, you know, an uprising, if you like. And then the stuff happening with Greece and all that, I felt, are there stirrings of that happening over here? And I think so far.
Well, arguably it did after the film was made, and the whole, for the record, I'm not in the Labour, I'm in another party that's already been mentioned, but we know what happened with the Labour Party after that film was made, and do you think that's an expression of what you're looking for?
Well, it's what you're finding. I mean, you don't seek, you find, in a sense. Yes, absolutely, I think so. But the forces, well, who knows what's going to happen? It's going to be, it's pretty daunting.
Are you, of the pair of you, are you more optimistic, less optimistic about the same? Since the film started to be made, since you became involved with the film, what's your optimism levels for the NHS?
As it was really interesting. Well, I haven't seen that since John showed us a rough cut earlier in the year. It was quite moving, and listening to Joanna again, you've got to have some hope. Otherwise, there's no bloody point doing anything. You may as well just give up. But having said that, I mean, just last week, I think I had one of my personal dips where I just thought, oh, sod it. It's just, we're all going to hell in a handcart. I may as well just give up anyway. And that happens every so often. You go into a hole and then you have to come out the other end and go, no. And I suppose what I've started saying to people in my more positive moments, and Joanna did touch on it, is that if after World War II, out of the rubble and the chaos, if that group of politicians could push through something as visionary and as amazing as the idea of providing a health service for a society, if they could do that, we've got a very different battle, because we're up against a hidden, complex web of corporate attacks.
They had loads of money then, though, didn't they?
Well,
we don't have a bit.
But if they had that determination to see it through, we must be able to do the same. We have to, with all our knowledge, with all our abilities. We have to. But the difference is there doesn't seem to be a political will, and it has to come from us, from below. You know, that's that. So optimistic. I am optimistic, but the only way it'll happen is if we can engage the public again.
Yeah.
And looking at the march, the first half of the march was I ended up being the man sat on my backside for 3 weeks, updating the website and doing all the photos and the press releases and all that sort of stuff. That was my job. I was hoping to march, but I didn't. And I saw it every day, the hope and the determination on people's faces. And then as we got closer to London and what happened to us with the Labour Party coming in, and it became every rally, suddenly we had Andy Burnham, suddenly we had 2, 3 MPs turning up. They weren't uninvited, but we didn't know they were. And suddenly every afternoon it became a Labour Party, which is why we missed the beginning. Is that where Joanna says we're not party political?
Yeah.
That was a spontaneous move on her part. She had to get to the microphone because that afternoon in Leicester, Liz Kendall, somebody else, all Labour related, had unannounced just grabbed the microphone and suddenly Labour are going to do this, Labour are going to do that. And all of us in our campaign group would describe ourselves as Labour lefty types. We're not, you know. But so it was a real shock to be treated in that way and to realise what we're up against.
There's a gent with a question over there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, first of all, I really enjoyed that. I thought it was a fantastic piece of work, and it made me angry, sad, and despairing, in equal measure. But just on that point about ignorance of the general public, if you like, I know from personal experience that a lot of the medical profession are actually ignorant as to what's going on under their feet as well. And junior doctors maybe are leading the way in terms of understanding what's happening. But my wife's a GP, and I know for a fact I've been to meetings of GPs in this city with regard to Depot Mank, and I know that the vast majority are utterly clueless about what is being planned for them, and it is all pre-decided. They're being engaged in a sham consultation now. I was just wondering whether you had any, over that process of the last 2 years, you got any insight into how the medical profession themselves are engaging with this, are growing in awareness, because if they were to actually take a lead in this, that could transform this campaign or this variety of campaigns.
It's interesting. I was talking in the break. The junior doctors is actually a ray of hope for campaigners, because we can use it to join in with them and attack the big picture. Unfortunately, the BMA are they are conservative with a small c. So they, far from being the militant, although they are getting better, but far from being militants, they're making it very much a contract issue. When really, yes, okay, it's the contract, but it's the way the contract fits into the new model. That's what's out. So the whole 7-day NHS is a complete con, just to get the public to mentally downgrade the NHS. They're making the brand toxic, is what they want to do. So we're all going to die at weekends, that kind of thing. It's very simple, but very effective, and people are believing it, which is crazy. However, the junior doctors, there is a very strong core who are quite militant, and they have seen the bigger picture when we've talked to them. There's a good group in London, and but again, they're up against their own, because when they go into a marching or demos, we know they've been told, don't use the word privatisation. It's like, what do you mean?
Who's telling them?
There's an interesting question.
And what authority do they have to tell them?
Oh, goodness me, how long have you got? There's an organisation called NHS Survival, and you look it up. It's worth a look at their website. It's if you really want grassroots astroturfing, I believe, and most of us believe, NHS Survival is a classic example of astroturfing. They appeared in September last year. With no previous history. I mean, look how long KONP's been going, all sorts of different campaign groups. They managed to get 10 minutes national airtime.
Well.
Yeah. They got 5 minutes on BBC and 5 minutes on Channel 4. No agenda, no policies, no history, but they managed to get in. They then they started touting a royal commission to investigate what was going on in the NHS. It's like, great, that's going to distract us for 2 or 3 years while they tidy it away. And it became very clear this was an astroturfing exercise. It's worth having a look at the website. You can spot them because they're very glossy websites. You should have seen our website, which I did. It was rubbish when we first started. I mean, it was, rust up quick, and we paid £8 a month for our... You don't get a glossy website unless you've got experts who know what they're doing. The language was very much talking about, well, it was integrated care, joined up care, all the things NHS England were spouting. And I'm very keen on looking at language and how it's used to manipulate people. And so they are, and we know that they have got themselves embedded within the BMA because there's a lot of doctors. There are a lot of doctors, not a lot, there's a core number of doctors, including some GPs in London, who we think have maybe just seen the light and they've gone, well, it's going to go, we may as well make ourselves part of it.
And
that's a problem.
How about the RCN? Because you talked about the BMA, or how about the RCN?
The nurses, they're much quieter.
Or Unison, the support staff, etc.
Well, again, Unison, I talked to a Unison rep on the front line in Cambridge, and he said, well, not supposed to be here really, because a union isn't supposed to be on the same picket line as unless it's a multi-union line.
Yeah.
I'm not, my union's equity, so that's about as political as that. But I think there is, within the doctors and health working community, you've got a small faction who have seen the light and they've gone, well, it's not going to get any better, so we may as well. And they're making themselves social enterprises, CICs, community interest companies. And the trouble with that is, then you really do start to break up the NHS. So, and then coming back to TTIP, interesting that, because what we understand is, unless the NHS can be identified 100% as a public service, the courts will come in and the corporations say, well, no, it's not, they're privatised. So in getting the GPs to federalise into groups and make themselves social enterprises,
it's ahead of time.
They're actually preparing, we're breaking it up. It's becoming private enterprises, so that's a real dangerous... So I think that, I think there are also, like the public, I do think the public are beginning to pay attention, actually, a little bit. A couple of friends rang me and said, have you seen what's on Facebook this week? Just locally in my area. And people who last year were, I've given up ranting on Facebook because it just cheeses people off. But they thought there were some new voices coming in and people are seeing that actually what we were spouting last year and being seen as rather, I don't know, troublemaking or whatever. People are actually saying,
Do you get a sense of that, Sean?
Well, I think my impression is the campaign movements have got a problem. Firstly, there's a problem. They all talk to each other, so that, there's a problem with the language. There's a lack of ability to get things boiled down into a way that people on the street can actually understand it in very simple. I mean, look, a year ago, I didn't know how much of the NHS had been privatised. I had absolutely no idea how expensive privatisation was compared to if it was publicly funded. I had absolutely no idea about that. Those are the two key things for me. It's bad for your pocket and it's bad for your health. The third thing is actually it's bad for the UK economy, as I would also argue, because actually maintaining healthy producers and maintaining healthy consumers is, from a Keynesian point of view, extremely good thing. And nobody ever talks about actually what public health means in terms of what it does for the economy.
I just wanted to follow up on something you just said in terms of healthy consumers and healthy producers. Because very often we talk about, well, the problem is A&E and people might die, but there's also an issue of people being put into miserable conditions without being properly looked after by all these reductions. So there is, of course, the emergency question, but there's also sort of a question of attrition, of just eating people up, demoralizing them, putting people into worse and worse health. Someone who's constantly sort of busy and worried about their own health, sort of about keeping healthy, about keeping a life, basically, about keeping in a position where they can take action, where they can do things, where they can move around. Yeah. Then when everything becomes a problem, then people like that, for example, move out of social organization.
Yes.
Someone who's constantly worried about their health isn't going to organize against the government. So there's actually different facets to it. It's not only about the emergency, which is of course important, but there's also this constant slowly eating up of people. And by making things so complex, and that's what you said about language, it is complex and it is complicated, and it's sort of it's sort of intricate. Yeah, there's like lots of different things being tied together. A TTIP is one such example, and so it becomes very challenging for people to actually unravel all that stuff and do something with it. And where do you even start?
But I think that's, in a way, that's part of the strategy. Right?
Yes, exactly.
Create confusion. I mean, the quick, if the ultimate end is to drive people into getting private health insurance, what's the best way of doing it? Make them lose faith in in their hospitals. I mean, I feel it now. I went to my, I did damage my knee last autumn, and I went to see my GP having had the, well, firstly he said, I'm going to send you for an MRI scan down to Roehampton Hospital, which is about an hour and a quarter away. And I said, why can't you send me down to my local hospital? And he said, because you will have to be seen by a consultant. And I said, even though it's completely unnecessary. And I said, well, how much does he cost? How much is he being done? He said, 250 quid, which turned out to be for, that would be for 20 minutes. And he said, even if the MRI scanner is only charged out at £150, that'll make £400. Whereas if I send you to InHealth and Roehampton, which was a scanner in a trailer in the car park, out in the car park, that'll be cheaper and quicker. So when I went to the scanner, when I went and had the scan, there were 3 young Italians, and they were working three 12-hour days, and they told me that they were doing 33 scans that day. So roughly 100 scans a week and a 40-hour week, if we work it out. And I said, well, how much am I costing for the scan? And they said, well, £450 to £500. Then I went back to my GP and he said, no, that's for the private class. For you as an NHS patient, it's actually a concessionary rate of 250 quid. And that is why it seems to be cheaper for you to have a scan out in the private sector than going into the National Health Hospital. So it's a rig, it's a complete fit-up, this thing of creating this obstruction, of having to go through a consultant. So I then thought, well, this sounds like a complete scam. Why don't I find out what the actual unit costs? So I did my research and called the head of Siemens sales in London, and I discovered because they're one of the 4 suppliers, and I discovered that there are 2 models of MRI scanners. One's a 1.5 Tesla, and the super duper one's 3 Tesla. Lower one costs 1.3 million, the higher one's 1.8 million. I then discovered from the Roehampton General Hospital report it costs half. Look, I worked through all the figures and the manning of the whole thing, and I worked out that the absolute maximum, including paying interest on the loans, say a state rate, which would be virtually nothing, I worked out it would be $1 million a year would be the absolute maximum, and yet. Doing 3 scans an hour, I worked out, be conservative about how many scans that scanner was doing. It was making $1.25 million, which immediately tells you that the private scanner was costing 25% more than if it had been done by the NHS, and that's probably a bit conservative, because then when I googled a company in Ohio that basically sold used MRI scanners. You could get any of those. I mean, you could get, it was like a car boot sale. You could get a very good scanner for $1 million, which is, a lot cheaper. That's about 750 grand, refurbished with a 10-year guarantee. And they said, oh yeah, we've got plenty of suppliers. And they used to send me emails saying, have you got any licensing problems? I posed as being a charity that wanted to buy a scanner. So, and in fact, a couple of friends of mine who went to the same scan in Roehampton said that wasn't a new scan. So, I mean, the profits they're making are colossal, and they're running 46. They're the biggest suppliers of scanners around the country. And I spoke to Caroline Malloy, who's a very good writer, and I said, is this whole thing actually a complete con, the actual 118 billion a year, that the official budget? actually, is the whole billing thing making it look much more expensive than it really is? And she said, yes.
Yeah.
You see, what I do now is I tell people, every time you go to your GP, not in an offensive way, but ask what it's costing. Just say, what's it costing? And then we should build a database of what is efficient, what is being charged. Because nobody is doing that. The Guardian spent a month doing this whole thing on the NHS without doing any single investigative work at all into the costing. You know, and because the commercial companies are not obliged to reveal their figures, it's all hidden. Well, the best thing to do is to ask the people on the job. I've got a letter in my hand last Friday from our little 38 Degrees group. It's an outrage letter sent to our local Tory MP, who's a Tory whip. She signs herself as a disillusioned ex-Tory. She's absolutely excoriating about how she says, you know, come clean. You know, you're aiming to privatise the NHS. We all know that. I mean, this is a lifelong Tory. And I spoke to her a couple of days ago, and she said, well, actually, I've got a relative who works for a private company that is supplying the NHS. And she said she's scandalised because she sees the invoices. I think light bulbs were 12 quid, and three-way adapters were being charged at £100. I mean, you hear these sort of applicable stories, but this is somebody who's really this is an ex-Tory talking. You know, it has the ring of truth about it.
And Sarah?
I just want to respond to that because I had a period where I was involved with sustainable procurement. We had something called the Sustainable Development Commission.
Oh yeah.
Which, when the Tories got in, scrapped. Yeah, and it was actually one of the few vehicles for progress in this country in terms of the way that we run our economy, in terms of us having any model for like a global economy in a sustainable way. And of course, you know, the Tories got in and scrapped it.
What was it called? Sorry?
Sustainable
Development Commission. So there was actually a model for sustainable procurement, and there were all sorts of interesting bits of research that came out of different hospitals. One was around, I mean, I think I'm going on a bit of a ramble here. But one was around plastics and using plastic tubing on babies with kidney problems, and that there are known ill effects of using these plastics. And it's coming back to your point about the sort of rigging of the types of things that that we have in NHS spending money on, which, you know, because it's feeding certain bits of industry, and they are calling the shots. So it's not working backwards from people's illness and going, okay, what do we need to spend money on to make people well? It's about how much plastics can we get into hospitals, disposable stuff that costs nothing to make, that makes huge profits for these companies. And so if you looked at their procurement list, you would be fascinated by who was profiteering out of what hospitals use.
And that's
And I spent time in hospitals where I can lie there and observe all this stuff, and I'm horrified. Which brings me round to a point, which is that I wonder at this point in time, you know, rather than, I mean, not instead of trying to protect the NHS, but whether we should be collectively thinking about what vision we, the people, want to have with our tax money, of what kind of health system we want to be provided with. A health system that really works and that's got, you know, products in it that are about people's health, not about somebody's profit.
I've got a partially linked point to that, which is people have been talking tonight. I don't know how much education anyone needs here on the whole Devo Mank thing, but it's been mentioned a few times, and it's certainly a vehicle for privatisation, and it's certainly it's an astroturf devolution. It's co-opting the notion of devolution for Osborne scams, in my humble opinion, not very humble opinion. The Greater Manchester Referendum Campaign, who are kind of, I guess, one of the more sceptical organisations of the whole process, against the whole process, are proposing to do a people's plan, but it is very consultative on a kind of Podemos kind of basis, if you get what I mean, to draw in what people genuinely want from devolution. And I've seen as the NHS is such a massive part of the plans, then I would imagine that the NHS could easily be crowbarred into what happens, and that will be happening over the next 6 months, and it's not really been announced yet. I was just at the meeting, well, I was at the meeting where it was discussed, and that's how I know about it, but it's one to sort of keep an eye out for the future. I know Steve had a point in response, or seemed to, and I know the gent who identified himself as working in the NHS, I'd ask him to respond shortly if he wants to say anything at all or not.
No pressure.
No pressure. Wow.
I was interested in sustainable development because NHS England right now, it's worth going onto their website and you will find sustainable transformation. Sustainable procurement is still there, I think. They are very good at twisting language now. And sustainable transformation is a terrifying thing. Sustainable is the big word that Simon Stevens, if you don't know him, this is the man. He's the man.
We know what we mean by sustainable.
Exactly. We know what we mean by devolution. But you actually can't, you now need to start.
That's not what
you
sustainable
can't say devolution anymore,
no.
Because what they mean by devolution is isolation and dividing everybody up into pockets. However, you're not going to be on your own, because in the NHS in Manchester, Simon Stevens, he's going to be sitting on every board there is. So it's a complete fallacy that you are devolved. It's rubbish, it really is. At every level, you are still going to be connected to Westminster and NHS England's central offices. It's the way it is. It's just that corrupt. Interestingly, one of our researchers this week, I asked her, I said, where's the evidence? I know I believe it. Where is the evidence that United Health or any other American corporation moved in to the UK? And it was about a month or two ago, and I thought, oh, she can't find. I got an email this week, and I put it out on Facebook, and it's brilliant. She found Alan Milburn, bless him, in 2003, approached United Health for consultation advice into new models for the NHS. Interestingly, the year after or so, this man became president of Global Health for United Health when he stopped being Blair's advisor. Now, you're not telling me there's no... That's in Hansard, by the way. You can find it in Hansard. 2003. And it's noted there, Alan Milburn spoke and invited in United Health. I'm delighted she found it.
Has Private Eye ever run that, or anyone like that? How common is that knowledge that you just...
Well, she had a hard time finding it. And it's,
right.
She scoured Hansard and found it. I can send you the link.
Send it to Private Eye.
Yeah. I mean, but then you realise this has been going on a long time. You know.
You got another point? Yeah.
Just a quick one about devolution. I mean, in many ways, what they're also trying to do with anything that they call that's in any way related to devolution is that they just devolve responsibility. And
yes.
If you work,
and blame.
Yeah. If you work in any sort of pseudo public institution. Then you can sort of work out how that works. Those above don't want to take any responsibility for anything, especially not if it might have negative consequences, which most of the things that they do will have, and they know this, right? So they just try to sort of devolve it downwards, and that makes it look to the outside as if people, people were actually to blame for what's going wrong. Which in fact, it's just sort of a system which, as you both said, really hides sort of very cleverly its own responsibilities. And you have that, politically, globally, on all sorts of scales, you have it, it's just a question of what scale you look at. But it's just one of their most favourite things that they do.
And I'm not opposed to proper devolution by any means.
No.
This is just not devolution.
That's why they picked that word.
But that's a devolution where actually power is being devolved. Yeah, or something is being done to power. Whereas in that kind of devolution that they are doing, it's all about displacing sort of blame or responsibilities, but it's not about actually having any real sort of potential to change anything at all.
Thank you. Jen, behind you.
Yeah, sorry, just to pick up on a point that was alluded to in the film about the kind of multiplicity of campaigns that are around. Is there any sort of attempt at unifying these into a, and just to pick up on a point that you mentioned there yourself about distilling this down to sort of some very simple, straightforward messages for the vast majority of the public. You know, there's a huge amount of complexity. There's not many people going to turn up at the Britain's Protection on the Tuesday night. You know, do you know what I mean? It's boiling it down to simple messages that could be got out there.
Simple message. The simple message. There's a leaflet there, which is not a perfect leaflet. It's not one of ours. We're part of something called Health Campaigns Together, which is when you know I've got a big thing. Let's all work together as long as you do what I say. There is a factor there that you meet people. I'm a late starter. I wasn't involved in campaigning until I started this. I've always had a healthy, cynical attitude of looking in. I think, knowing that something wasn't quite right with politics, but never being really involved. This drew me in, and I can't help but be involved now. The good thing that's happened since the filming began, there has been a new interest in working together. However, we are now not the only group who've experienced. People are being more open about it. They've also come across it, and they know it happens. So the need for, secrecy, I suppose. You're careful who you work with now. And I think we had an exercise recently. We were instrumental in forming a small, 21 groups from around the country. Steve's groups, KOMP here's one, Tameside, Bolger and Tameside. Did you sign a letter to Corbyn? I can't remember. Yeah. As soon as Corbyn got in, we wrote him quite a strong letter. Some groups wouldn't sign it because they felt it was too strong. All we did was say, Labour's policy is rubbish, can we come and talk to you? in nice language. But we pointed out the PFI, we pointed out various things that needed addressing, rather than a well done, can we come and talk to you letter. But from that, we then met with Heidi Alexander. We got passed down. It was a bit of a non-starter, really. We all had suspicions that Heidi Alexander is and was not the person who should be doing the Labour Party health, but that's the way it goes. But it was good to go and hear her speak and see her say that couldn't take another top-down reorganisation, couldn't do this, patients don't need more change, the usual things you get thrown at you when you're talking about renationalising the NHS. The one thing I'm really proud of is that 21 campaign groups actually got together and we trusted each other. And for me, that's the big thing that I lost around September 2014 after the march. Our small core group became very, very hardened to outsiders. We were very distrustful because we've been treated so badly. It's taken a long time to overcome that. And actually and I think after the election, we all went into a big dip and we all had to recover as best we could. And, the campaign world, you won't know him, but there's activists who've had heart attacks. They've been depressed. Joanna got glandular fever. She went into a bit. We're up at 2 a.m, sort of doing after the kids have gone to bed and all that. So we start our work. That's what we do on Facebook. So. What was your question again? I'm rambling.
It was just about the unifying of the campaign.
You've
got more of a...
Well, I mean, my feeling is, of course, the campaign movement reflects what's happening in the Labour Party completely. And at the moment, it might look quite rosy, but I would have thought there's going to be, at some stage, there's going to be an eruption between the Blairites and the Corbynites, and that's going to be reflected in the campaign movement. So there's a lot of positioning going on. I think, this is my impression from the outside, there's a lot of positioning going on, people not quite sure. And it's quite interesting hearing David Owen speak. He came out of the preview of my film before Christmas. The first thing he said is, this film should be seen by Labour MPs because they're running around like headless chickens, they don't know what's hit them. And I'm actually trying to fix that now. I'm trying to fix a screening inside the House for MPs. And he also said that he thought the film tells you a great deal about, to those people and people who aren't aware of it, you know, what the Corbyn phenomenon is about.
Yes.
I mean, I think all this UKIP, Corbyn, all this stuff actually, I think, is much deeper than simply to do with party politics. And I bang on about this endlessly, which is that I think what I'm sensing, is probably in myself too, is a fantastic contempt for the whole way that the political and civil institutions have been corrupted by big money, by the corporations and by the banks. And I think there's just a general awareness that our whole system is actually corrupt. And these are all expressions of that. And that's what, yeah, and that is, you know, my brother-in-law, his son was the senior spad for Ed Balls. Nothing left Ed Balls' office without Kaz's approval. He's called Karen Pallant. You can read his articles now because he's not earning any money. He's lost his job. Well, he hasn't. He's got a decent job outside. But we used to sit down at supper together, and you could say anything to him. He had an answer. I said, Kaz has an answer for everything and a question for nothing. You know what I mean? He had it all worked out. And of course, if you ask the wrong questions, you've got to get the wrong answers. And that's why the political establishment and the researchers and the pollsters got it all wrong on the election. They didn't ask the right questions. If they'd gone into people's homes and said, do you think our political system has got, you know, that money talks too much in our political life, they would have got a roaring yes. And if you then come up with policies that actually took on the city, took on the financial institutions in a proper way, it would have been, I think, a completely different result. But they're so compromised, and they're also, you know, we've had 35 years of Thatcherism, and you know, there's a lot of younger, you know, the Thatcher generation who have no idea of any alternative. People like Kaz genuinely believe that the only way for Labour to stand a chance in any election is to keep the city sweet. I think they're completely wrong. I don't think Blairism or Blairites on the whole are sort of, my New Year's resolutions, I'm not going to think they're all evil bastards. You know, they are actually just misguided.
It started under John Smith, actually, the prawn cocktail circuit, if you remember that.
That's right.
Yeah. The gent there, if there's anything you'd like to say entirely anonymously, it's only us and the internet.
I think it's one of those issues that the more you find out, the more confused you are.
Right.
Which is really sort of quite disturbing. I sort of, on my personal experiences, I think another thing about it is the amount of money that you hear. I mean, I can't like verify anything, but I think that is one of the things, and it's people are going to think it's non-sustainable because of the money being spent. I mean, one example in my job, I was getting a train somewhere, and I looked online and it said it was like £7 for a single, £12 for a return. I saw the train ticket come back, it was like something like 24 quid.
That's what had been billed to the NHS.
Yeah, and I asked the guy in procurement about it, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'll get back to you about it." Didn't hear anything from him.
So someone has creamed 100% extra
Well,
to
I think
vanish
it's
somewhere.
like a lot of things with sort of there's like agencies for doing things.
Right.
I don't know how it's done, but it's like a train sort of some agency gets our train tickets, but like it's like one of the biggest. You know, if you're buying stuff in the NHS. It's just goes completely against all economics. That if you pay, the more you're buying, the less you get it for. It just seems to go the way of the NHS and everyone.
There's a few people want to speak to that. I think I'll go 1, 2, 3 if that's all right. You had a response.
My question is whether, in fact, the money is actually changing hands. I mean, I actually wonder, is there, in fact, a completely false superstructure going on where bits of paper is changing hands that make things look more expensive than they are in order to make the NHS look far more expensive than it actually is really costing, in order to make the private sector look cheaper? I mean, is it a complete...
There's got to be more clarity about what is spent and where it's spent, and
that's right,
people's access to it as well.
Absolutely.
Because that's the only way you're going to get people to sort of say, well, I'm not going to vote for anyone who goes for that.
But that's an interesting point, because when I was doing my sustainable procurement stuff, I actually got representatives from Manchester's schools, council, universities and NHS all together in one room, so sustainability and procurement people, to find out that there were these agencies where they went to get their stuff. And everybody was confused about what was private and what was public. and you know, this is going back to like 2010. So 5 years ago, everybody was really confused about the, you know, the labelling, the status, right? So, you know, and then it turned out that the office supplying universities with thousands of reams of paper then became the same person operating that office in the northwest and in the northeast. But I couldn't get access to ask of them about their procurement policies because they were private, they were semi-private.
Yeah.
Commercial
And
confidentiality.
so what I think has been really interesting is this whole, a bit like the Sustainable Development Commission being destroyed, to almost destroy the freedom of information system. So all of this transparency was about to evolve and emerge through the last Labour government. I mean, I don't think Tony Blair was an angel by any stretch, right? We all know that. But, you know, there was something good going on there, and it's all being clamped right down on. You know, and the more that we get this encroachment of privatisation, the less we're able to know, because they've got all these laws to protect them, the commercial laws that
Well, once we've wrapped up on this, I'm going to ask John one last question, but yourself on what we've been discussing.
Well, it's sort of tied. I mean, because I think that's really interesting, because as Deborah said, it wasn't probably perhaps clear what she meant by the word structural. The structural privatisation, it isn't just the frontline services. The structural privatisation, they're behind the scenes in the management, big time.
Yeah.
United Health, Allied, Serco, Capitas. If you look at what they call the lead provider framework, which are the people advising CCGs about how to spend the money, they are sitting up here advising the CCGs to spend money on their own subsidiary companies. That's what's going on. But they're invisible. CCG is your clinical commissioning group, which is made up of GPs, health workers. I kind of say it's a bit like sending the journalists into Iraq. We were embedding journalists into Iraq. We were going to see warfare as it had never been seen before. All we saw was some poor bloke trying to dodge the bullets. I see the CCGs as the same thing, embedding, under the name of transparency and openness, health workers, GPs, into the very system that they are going to be privatising. They can't see the wood for the trees. That's the problem. It's very clever and deceitful and evil, because they're turning GPs into their own enemies, I think. And that's so it is. Journalists, it was a very clever move to put journalists in with battalions, and we saw nothing. You know, that's exactly it. Same thing. There's something. Oh, there's an expo in Manchester in September, NHS Expo, for God's sake. I think it costs about £200 a ticket.
Does it indeed?
You may want to try and get working at the arena or something, waitressing. There is a free event though in Birmingham. The Heidi Alexander meeting came about from a collection of people we met at a free expo in Birmingham. It's in July. It's called P4 Health, Procurement for Health, run by a lovely company up in Glasgow. The first thing, I wish I had the slides here, first thing I saw when you entered, we were registered as a suit on and briefcase, and the first thing you came across was a car, a prize.
Yeah.
That was this is a procurement event. What was really lovely that day, we went to disrupt it. What was really funny was that we didn't know that somebody else was there also to disrupt. We were about to go and they stood up and started to. It was like carry on campaigning. But what was lovely that day was that there was an audible gulp because most of the people there were small to middle business people who probably turned up thinking, well, I'm going to be helping the NHS, supplying services, blah, blah, blah. There was literally a what? When they realised to get any sense of procurement, they had to get themselves on an approved list. They hadn't been told that. They'd spent money buying a ticket to this thing, and they hadn't been told, you're going to have to get onto our
They're getting shafted as well.
list. So everyone, and I said, in my moment of, I said, you're all being shafted. As much as the public are, you as business people are all being shafted. And I think a lot of them were really quite shocked that they were suddenly realised they thought they were going to walk away with contracts. Nah, it's all been, the big boys have got it all mapped out.
Stitched.
Yeah.
Was lady at the front, you do have something you want to say a while back, is it still in your mind, or?
Yeah, well, in response to this, but really also in response to something that both of you said, the tickets, travel tickets and things like that, very often those are outsourced now, right?
Yes.
So actually, the people who buy the travel tickets, so whatever organization it is, they get a commission, and so for them it's not actually best to buy the cheapest ticket. Right?
So because they get commission on the price.
Well, yeah. So there's that. I think, and that's the case in many sort of pseudo-public institutions or public or whatever, half privatized, neoliberalized, whatever you want to call them. And the other thing, like what you said about sometimes keeping things secret, and and also what I appreciated about the documentary, that was actually in many ways a denunciation. It wasn't really sort of seeking for approval, because that's something else. If we want to speak to the public, like whose approval are we really seeking, and what kind of what kind of sort of cooperation do we really want, and from whom? Because if people slowly are being integrated into the structures that actually hold them down, and then they can no longer walk away from them, and actually that deceit of being critical and of being able to resist, well, that just becomes a way of making that status quo more bearable. So
that's deep.
So there's all this as well.
Can I just say something funny? John turned up at a time when we were really going through quite a lot. We'd just been invited into some group called the NHS Reinstatement Bill group. And we were really, when we saw the list of people who were also attending, Joanna and I said to Joanna, you're not going. This is a lynch mob. You're not going. And that's when Deborah turned up, bless her, because she's brilliant. We said, Deborah, would you go for us? Because we're not going. Old enemies were in that team. And suddenly this filmmaker turned up, and we actually didn't trust him to start with. Because we we got so confused about all sorts of things. So I just wanted to put that anecdote in, because do you remember those days?
Certainly do.
Yes. And we've had moments since where we've all fallen out, and, because it is very tense.
It's quite funny. Lucia and I wasn't allowed, obviously, to film there was a reinstatement bill group meeting, and then part of the people that were suspicious of were one end of the table, and then the 999 lot were the other end of the table. They didn't know me, so I went to the 999 lot and I said, well, actually, David Owen got me in, which exactly wasn't.
Of course, we all went.
Well, and then I went to the other end with all the consultants. Everybody said, well, Ken Loach got me in, because they're basically quite square, if you like. Well, this is really interesting. I've got two sworn enemies who both commended me for this. You can't be more unlikely bedfellows than Loach.
I've got one more question, if it's all right for John, and before I do,
sure.
well, actually, I'll say some closing things at the end, but. As compared to the other projects that you've done over decades, etc., very diverse, as I outlined at the beginning, what are the lessons or observations from this? Not necessarily pertinent to the NHS per se, or privatisation per se, but what are your lessons and observations from this that you hadn't learned or observed in the decades leading up to it? Does that make sense as a question?
It does. Well, it's rather banal. I've got this tiny little camera here, which I've ended up being able to. The sound is extraordinary. I got it for 120 quid because I see that this has cost £3,000 so far. It's cost absolutely nothing. Everybody's worked for free. 25 years ago, an hour-long documentary, the BBC budget for it would have been 160, 80, 100,000 pounds. That was sort of quite normal. I mean, certainly six figures was the normal rating ITV companies for a documentary. But with this little camera that's like that, I've actually found that the cafe scene where they're talking at the end, when I pan down, that's literally just done in the palm of my hand. I've never shot in my life before. The sound is remarkable. I mean, you think, oh God, it all looked terribly grotty. Well, I mean, I can go off on I'm confident, getting my confidence just to go off on my own and be with the guys and feel, well, I actually can get it.
Brilliant.
you know, and also it gives you the, I think people in the front of the camera felt much more relaxed, even if I had to put it right there. Somehow it's different from having a, so that's the technology, and I can't believe obviously the technology is just amazing.
That's a very encouraging kind of
well,
point,
anybody
isn't
can
it?
make a movie. Anybody can make a movie, you know.
Well, the editing and the thought and the observations, not anyone can do that, but from a technical point of view they can, and they can learn the other stuff hopefully as they go.
Yeah.
And thanks for that.
Anyway, and also the thing, always the most important thing is there's got to be something undeniable about the people you have in your films. You know, so that people don't doubt. I mean, I've got an 84-year-old editor, probably the oldest practicing editor in the country. He's absolutely brilliant. He's worked with absolutely everybody. The one thing he can't do is operate the technology. So I got a spring chicken of 78 who's absolutely brilliant. Gus. And Gus is absolutely amazing. Well, I knew that he wasn't interested in politics at all, so I rather sort of shyly said, well, look, I understand you probably won't be interested in doing this project. You know, he's a bit of an old hippie and things like that. He actually worked in the London Filmmakers Co-op, it then turned out later. And I called him the next day, and he said, you know, the one thing is I didn't feel I was being lied to, because there was a surprise. So, you know, and I think that's always the trick, is to have people who there's a kind that dreadful word, authenticity, but something undeniable about what the people say, whether you agree with them or not.
Thank you. I'm going to ask both of you if you've got any kind of blogs or just a very brief, quick announcement of anywhere we can read or see more of your stuff. Steve?
Well, I've got the cards there. The 999 website, it needs a complete overhaul because it's now big. We've got an archive on there. You can see pictures of the march. And we do have a blog. I tend to write occasionally, but it was always intended as an open blog. So if you've got anything you'd like to post regarding the NHS, and particularly if you've got views on Devo.
I've got a piece.
Manchester is, you know, a bit, it isn't, I should have brought all my things with me. I was here last year protesting, saying, you know, it's not just a local issue. This affects, because what we're doing is breaking up the NHS. So, you know, and we know that Manchester's the first, Cornwall will be next. Newcastle's looking at it, Hampshire's looking at it, Devon's looking at it. It's awful. It's, you know.
Okay.
So.
Thank you, John.
I've got my own personal blog. It's at the end there. www.johnfurse.wordpress.com.
John Furse, which is Thurse.
No, Furse.
I'm sorry.
John-Furse.
Yeah.
Could I just clarify something about using the film as a sort of awareness raising tool or whatever? Is Steve right in saying that you're now going to post the whole film for everybody to access?
Yeah, I mean, that's right, but this is the 1 hour version, which maybe some people may feel is a bit long, but we've already got more material. My whole idea is to actually do it over a period of years, because I think my whole idea originally was that we could be seeing an important piece of social history happening, which is the development of a whole new politics.
Yes.
That was my hunch.
It might be.
And I would like to do it over the years and try to raise money to do that. That's really what I want to do.
That's brilliant, thank you. Just a quick announcement, you know, from us, we're Manchester Film Co-op, and if you want to help us put on events like this in the future, please come and speak to me or Sarah. There's a petition going around asking, I think it's Manchester City Council, to be a TTIP free zone, and presumably that's online, that you can sort of start passing around social media, etc. Is there anything I've missed out, Sarah?
Yeah, so the petition is on the Manchester City Council's website, but it's also, we've got a signpost to it on our Facebook page. So please share and pass, you know, keep the momentum going and the awareness raising.
One of my questions, I'll say this before you fit. One of my questions, and if some of us are in the bar downstairs, was to be, do you think, and don't answer it for God's sake, but do you think the binary nature of the European referendum coming up will impact negatively or positively, or neither of the above? But we'll leave that floating in your head, and you say your last thing.
I just wanted to ask, if we're going to the bar anyway, but I'd be interested to know, and I'm sure John would, how the film makes you feel about campaigning, or, you know, does it make you feel optimistic or not, or would it make, does it make people, do you think it'll make people want to get involved, or I don't know.
I thought it was brilliant, from someone who's done a lot of campaigning, I thought it was a very good insight into what it's like to not be a campaigner who suddenly gets sucked into it. I thought it was really good from that, a very good reflection of that. It didn't change my opinion much on the NHS or privatisation, because I did know quite a lot of that stuff, but from the grassroots angle upward, yeah, I thought it was really good insight into the lives of people and what motivates them. Probably one of the better things I've seen on that. Yeah, that's superb. Yeah, sorry,
I
just
thought it was
moving.
really good, and the kind of personal nature of it
Yeah.
as well, I think will bring people in and make them want to learn more. And
What nature?
Personal.
Person.
Yeah.
But then what you said about them being genuine, they sounded like genuine people. And I think people will relate to that and then want to get involved in campaigning probably.
I hope so, because I think that's where the hope is. And I was talking to somebody in the break that actually we've had a year or more of being much more cerebral, and we've been involved with various committees, and it's nice to be asked, but actually I'm now really keen that we get back to trying to get the public again to be aware, and I think people have been removed from politics and they don't feel they have a right to actually stand up and shout.
Well, I think they want to get in. I mean, I think the sympathy is, the basic sympathy is there. In that, I mean, for example, I went to support the doctor's strike, and because I was on the last minute, all I did was scribble on a piece of card, doctor's tip, and hunt and put a cross through it. And everybody I walked past with that card on my front, everybody in the hospital or in the hospital grounds that I walked past went, yes.
Yeah.
So they're on, I think people are on our side,
Yeah.
but they don't know about the more complicated issues like the funding and the other things, and how difficult it is, and I think we need to educate people more like that.
And I think it comes back to that lady's point, because I've always said it is so, there are so many complex, I can't keep up with it all. Luckily we have a team that can, and some people are very good at keeping up with all the legal stuff, and actually the complexities aside, it's what do we want as a society? And that is a very simple question, and that's what we have to keep getting back to. What do we want? Which is why on that leaflet, the public...
That's for the bar, that question. What do we want as a society? Isn't necessarily a simple question.
Well, but people can understand
Yeah,
it.
they can understand it as a
And I
question.
think it's somehow about saying the simple things. A colleague of mine was telling me that recently, sadly, her dad died, and he come out of hospital to be with them and dad at home, and it was in Ireland, okay, and her mum and dad have got some insurance, okay. They're not poverty stricken, they've got some insurance, but the doctor had to be called, obviously, to certify the death. The doctor came in, was very nice, do you know what I mean? And as he was coming, her mum was scuffling around in her bag, right, to get €100 to pay him, right? €100 to pay him. And it shocked me, I'll be honest, and I think those sort of tales, and probably the reason why her dad had never been to the doctors was because it costs €60 every time you go to see the doctor, and that's somebody with insurance, with some insurance, and it's like those simple tales. Do you know what I mean? That we've got to get those type of messages across to people to understand that that's what we don't want again.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's 5 to 10. I'm going to knock it on. Can we have a round of applause for? Carry on downstairs. Thanks, everybody.